Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving straight into the immediate economic ripples of the Trump administration's newly implemented tariffs.
Yeah,
You've shared a set of really insightful articles detailing these policies that actually went into effect today, April 1st, 2025. They'll be formally announced tomorrow.
that's right.
And our mission, really, is to cut through the noise and understand what this actually means for, for you, for the listener, and the wider economy right now.
And we've got some solid sources, analysis from the Tax Foundation, plus real-time reporting from the Times. So we're looking at projections and what's actually happening.
Good.
And just to frame the magnitude right away, this isn't small stuff. These tariffs, they're hitting over $1 trillion in imports immediately.
Wow, $1 trillion.
Yeah, and that's projected to climb to $1.4 trillion pretty soon
Yeah.
as some exemptions phase out. It's a major jolt to the whole global trade system.
Okay, a jolt. So let's unpack this. Maybe start with the financial markets. The reports talk about a rapid correction in equities. What's that about for someone watching their 401k?
Well, what's really telling is how quickly investors are reevaluating the strength of the U.S. economy because of these new barriers. A rapid correction just means a quick, sharp drop in stock prices.
Okay.
It's triggered by a sudden shift in sentiment, which is exactly
Yeah.
what we're seeing. It signals real worry that these tariffs could, slow down future growth.
And it's not just the stock market feeling jittery, is it? There's this growing uncertainty that the sources keep mentioning.
Oh, absolutely. Trade policy uncertainty. The data says it surged to an all-time high.
All-time high.
Yeah. What that means for you, basically, is that U.S. trade policy itself is now a huge wild card globally. Businesses need some stability to plan, to invest. This level of uncertainty, it makes long-term strategy really, really tough.
Which leads right into those confidence numbers, I guess. Consumer confidence, business confidence, both taking a hit immediately after the announcements. Why is that such an important early sign?
Think of those surveys like a pulse check on how people and businesses are feeling about the future. When they drop sharply right after the tariff news, it tells us people are already bracing for impact.
Right.
Whether it's expecting higher prices at the store or businesses anticipating cost increases, supply chain mess-ups, this drop in confidence can actually become a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Less spending, less investment.
And it's not just feelings. The experts are recalibrating too, right? Analysts are cutting growth forecasts.
That's right. Those revised forecasts. They're basically analysts trying to price in the tariff impact, the higher costs, potential trade slowdowns, the general drag these things have on economic activity. They're saying, okay, based on this new reality, we think the economy's going to grow slower.
Okay, so market jitters, uncertainty, predictions of slower growth. Let's get into the more tangible effects. Jobs, economic output. The Tax Foundation model had some pretty stark numbers.
It did. What's striking for you to consider is their projection, a 0.4% cut in overall U.S. GDP.
0.4%.
Yeah, and a jobs decrease equivalent to about 309,000 full-time positions in the short term. And remember, that's before factoring in any retaliation from other countries.
Wow. Okay, so that's just the initial hit.
Exactly. It really highlights the immediate headwind these policies create.
You mentioned the 2018 steel tariffs before we started. That really showed the potential job trade-offs, didn't it?
It's a classic example, really insightful. You protect one sector, but what about the others? Back then, the steel tariffs might have created, say, 100,000 steel jobs.
Okay.
But estimates suggest around 75,000 jobs were lost in industries that use steel. Think manufacturing and construction.
Right, the downstream effects.
Precisely. Apply that logic to these much broader tariffs. Maybe you boost 80,000 steel and aluminum jobs now, but you're putting at risk a chunk of the 12 million jobs in industries using those metals. It shows how protecting one area can unintentionally hurt others, maybe even more.
A potential gain swamped by losses elsewhere. Okay, let's shift to something everyone feels directly. Prices. How are these tariffs going to hit our wallets?
This is probably the most direct impact you'll feel. The tariffs are basically a tax on imported stuff and that extra cost. Very often, it gets passed straight on to you, the consumer. We're already seeing big retailers warning they'll have to raise prices on all sorts of things as these tariff costs get factored in.
And it sounds like these price hikes might hit lower-income families the hardest.
That's a really critical point. These kinds of price increases tend to be regressive, meaning they eat up a bigger slice of the budget for people earning less. And interestingly, this is a group that showed increased support in the recent election, so they're likely to feel these economic pressures pretty sharply.
The Tax Foundation also looked at after-tax incomes, didn't they? What did they find across different groups?
Yeah, their projection for 2026 An average 1% drop in after-tax income across the board because of the tariff.
1%?
But what's really notable is the impact on the top 1%. It's estimated to be slightly smaller, just 0.8%.
So less impact at the very top.
Right. Which again underlines that regressive point. The burden, in terms of lost buying power, seems to fall more heavily on lower and middle incomes.
Beyond the price tags right now, there's also inflation expectations. Sounds like those are rising too. What does that mean?
It's fascinating how quickly policy can shift psychology. Long-term inflation expectations. They've reportedly spiked to a 3-decade high after these announcements.
30 years. Wow.
Yeah. And that matters, because when people expect higher inflation, they act on it. Businesses might raise prices sooner, workers might demand higher wages. It can feed on itself and actually cause more inflation.
And the actual tariff rates themselves, they've jumped significantly, haven't they?
Dramatically. The average U.S. tariff rate went from just 2.5% in 2024 to a projected 8.4% now. To give you context, that's the highest average rate since 1946.
It's right after World War II.
Exactly. That kind of rapid, substantial hike in import costs, it's almost certainly going to keep pushing inflation higher.
So domestically, market wobbles, lower confidence, job worries, rising prices. But the U.S. isn't an island. How are other countries reacting?
The reaction's been swift.
Yeah.
And, well, pretty predictable. Major partners, China, Canada, the EU, they've already announced or started rolling out retaliation.
Counter tariffs.
Exactly. Targeting U.S. exports. So new hurdles for American businesses selling abroad.
We've seen this movie before with tariffs. Do the sources give any sense of how big this retaliation could get?
The specifics are still unfolding, but yeah, the Tax Foundation's past work gives us a clue. Retaliatory tariffs really hurt the competitiveness of U.S. exports. Lower sales overseas could mean job impacts here in export-heavy industries.
And it sounds like the phones are already ringing off the hook, diplomatically speaking.
Oh, yeah. The White House admits lots of nations have reached out already.
What are they asking for?
Likely trying to get exemptions, carve-outs, maybe negotiate changes. This immediate flurry of calls just shows how much friction these tariffs cause right out of the gate.
And with more tariffs possibly coming tomorrow, this international scrambling is probably just getting started.
Absolutely. That April 2nd announcement is looming large. Foreign governments are definitely working angles to minimize the damage to their own economies.
And the White House says Trump is willing to listen.
They've said he's open to talking with foreign governments, corporate leaders looking for lower rates. So, yeah, it confirms these negotiations are happening right now. It's an immediate consequence.
We're even hearing specifics, like from the UK.
Yeah, the UK Foreign Secretary basically told them to prepare for the worst. Hopes for a special British exemption seemed dashed.
Ouch.
And, interestingly, a recent UK poll found 71% of Brits actually support retaliating against the U.S.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so the pressure's building there, too.
But the White House line seems pretty firm. Want to avoid tariffs? Make your stuff in the U.S.
That's the stated goal, right? Incentivize domestic production. But the reality for businesses, global supply chains are incredibly complex, built over decades.
Not easy to just flip a switch.
Exactly. Moving production takes huge time, investment, logistical nightmares. It's not a practical short-term fix for most.
Okay, let's pivot to the money side for the U.S. government. These tariffs do bring in revenue, right?
They do. The Tax Foundation estimates about $108.2 billion in conventional federal revenue for 2025 from these tariffs. That's a lot of cash.
But there's a catch, isn't there? That revenue doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Precisely. You have to factor in the negative impact on the overall economy, the GDP hit, the job losses we talked about. When you do that, the dynamic revenue estimate drops to $93.2 billion for 2025.
Why the drop?
Because a weaker economy means less income tax collected, less corporate tax, and so on. So the tariffs bring money in directly, but they also indirectly reduce other tax revenues, partially canceling out the gain.
So a revenue boost, but significantly offset by the broader economic drag. What about how this hits different income levels in the short run? We mentioned prices hitting lower incomes harder, but what's the overall after-tax picture?
In the immediate term, the Tax Foundation suggests is pretty broad. They project everyone up to the 99th percentile sees about a 1% drop in after-tax income.
Okay.
The top 1%, a slightly smaller hit, 0.8%. So initially, at least, the financial burden seems fairly evenly spread across most people through higher prices and maybe slower wage growth.
It sounds like a lot of different groups are already raising alarms, not just economists.
Oh, for sure. The sources mention specific anxieties bubbling up, like Republicans in rural areas, Worried about fertilizer costs going up for farmers? That hits their bottom line directly.
Makes sense.
And northern states are worried about disruptions to industries tied closely with Canada, lumber, fresh produce. Those are big local economic drivers.
And these aren't just U.S. concerns, right? Trading partners are nervous too.
Definitely.
Yeah.
The National Farmers Union in the UK, for instance. They're pleading with their government. Don't sacrifice British farming just to get a U.S. trade deal later. They fear getting flooded with U.S. produce made under different standards.
Interesting. But there seems to be some debate, even within the UK, about how bad the inflation impact might be.
Yeah, economists at the Bank of England suggest that the immediate UK inflation hit might be less severe than feared. It depends on how everyone else reacts. Exchange rates, a lot of moving parts.
That's still risks?
Oh, yeah. They warned the tariffs could still mess with the UK financial system. Banks, mortgages, pensions, if they fuel higher global inflation and force central banks like theirs to hike rates.
And businesses themselves. It sounds like they're already reacting.
We're hearing reports, exporting companies rushing shipments to beat the clock. Some are already planning for potential layoffs, production cuts, anticipating lower demand or higher costs.
And the political fallout internationally sounds pretty sharp, too.
Yeah, the UK's shadow business secretary called the tariffs the worst failure of trade policy for a generation. Strong words. So the political heat is rising alongside the economic worries.
So let's try to wrap this initial snapshot up. We've seen immediate market jitters, confidence dropping, inflation fears rising, a complex job picture, serious international friction and retaliation starting, government revenue gains that are partly offset by economic slowing, and a broad hit to after-tax incomes. And crucially, this is just day one, essentially. More tariffs are set to be announced tomorrow. These trends could definitely intensify.
That's a really good summary. The key takeaway for you, the listener, is that these policies are triggering a chain reaction. Interconnected economic effects, domestically and globally, playing out in real time.
So as you, our listener, process all this, the immediate economic shifts, the global reactions, what do you think the biggest long-term consequence might be for the U.S., for the world economy? And what other factors, maybe things we didn't touch on, could either amplify or maybe soften these initial impacts down the road? Lots to think about, and that's your Deep Dive for today.